The Dark Secret. In the small town of São Cipriano, nestled between verdant hills, the imposing gray stone church loomed against the sky. Father Jerônimo, a tall and thin man with penetrating eyes, was famous for his fervent sermons and dedication to his parishioners. However, few knew the terrible secret that tormented him. On full moon nights, a horrific transformation overtook his body and soul. His skin became covered in coarse, dark fur. His teeth elongated into sharp fangs, and his eyes shone with a yellowed, wild gleam. That night, as the full moon hovered in the sky like a watchful eye, Father Jerônimo locked himself in his room at the parsonage. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he struggled against the impending transformation. His nails scratched at his bare chest, leaving red marks on his pale skin. A muffled scream escaped his lips as the first wave of pain hit him. His bones cracked and rearranged, muscles expanded, and his human consciousness was gradually swallowed by the beast. When the transformation was complete, the creature that was once Father Jerônimo lifted its snout and sniffed the air. The scent of human flesh filled its nostrils, awakening an insatiable hunger. With a terrifying howl, the beast leapt through the window and plunged into the darkness of the night in search of its first victim. The full moon bathed São Cipriano's narrow streets with a spectral light, casting shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. The silence of the night was broken by the sound of claws scraping the pavement and the panting breath of a creature on the hunt. The werewolf, once Father Jerônimo, raced through the alleyways, its keen senses detecting every movement and scent. The beast within it roared, demanding blood and flesh. Its yellow eyes gleamed with an insatiable hunger as it sniffed the air for an unsuspecting victim. In the central square, Dona Cecilia, an elderly lady, was slowly making her way home after a late meeting with her knitting club friends. The werewolf caught her sweet and faint scent, mingled with the aroma of lavender. Without hesitation, the beast sprang from the shadows, closing its jaws around the poor woman's neck before she could even scream. The attack was swift and brutal. Within minutes, Dona Cecilia was reduced to torn remains and a pool of blood on the sidewalk. The werewolf licked its snout, savoring the metallic taste, but its hunger remained unsatisfied. Meanwhile, young police officer Rodrigo was on his night patrol. Turning a corner, he came upon the gruesome scene. The initial shock gave way to fear as his eyes met the monstrous figure crouched over the victim's remains. Trembling, he drew his weapon and ordered the creature to surrender. The werewolf slowly turned, its fierce eyes locked on the officer. With a threatening growl, it advanced. Rodrigo fired once, twice, but the bullets seemed ineffective. In panic, he tried to flee, but the beast was too fast. Rodrigo's scream echoed through the night, muffled by the sound of bones breaking and flesh being torn. The beast devoured its second victim with even greater voracity, as if each death only intensified its thirst for blood. As the night wore on, screams of terror echoed through the small town. The residents locked themselves in their homes, terrified by the sounds of destruction and the howls that seemed to come from all directions. At the police station, the phone never stopped ringing. Confusing reports of attacks and sightings of a monstrous creature flooded the emergency line. Chief João Almeida, an experienced man who thought he had seen it all in his career, felt a chill down his spine as he heard the descriptions. Something terrible was loose in São Cipriano, something he had never faced before. Meanwhile, in the church, the bell began to ring on its own, emitting a mournful sound that spread through the town like a harbinger of death. Those few who dared to look out the window swore they saw a beastly figure leaping between rooftops, with eyes glowing with a demonic light. As the night drew to a close, the werewolf, now sated but still hungry for destruction, returned to the parsonage. With the first rays of sunlight on the horizon, the transformation began to reverse. The fur receded, the claws retracted, and the monstrous body slowly returned to human form. When the day finally dawned, Father Jerônimo awoke naked and bloodied on the floor of his room, fragments of memory from the previous night tormenting his mind. Horrified, he fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he murmured a desperate prayer for forgiveness. Outside, Police sirens began to wail, and panic spread through São Cipriano. The night hunt had ended, but the terror was only beginning. The morning sun revealed an unrecognizable São Cipriano. Police tape cordoned off several areas of the town, while forensic investigators collected evidence from the night's attacks. The metallic smell of blood still lingered in the air, mingling with the aroma of fear emanating from the residents. Chief João Almeida ran a hand through his gray hair, observing the scene with a mix of horror and bewilderment. In his 30 years of service, he had never seen anything like this. The bodies, or what remained of them, showed claw and tooth marks that did not match any known animal. Meanwhile, Father Jerônimo walked the streets, offering spiritual comfort to the shaken citizens. His pale face and deep dark circles were attributed to the shock of recent events, but internally he battled fragmented memories and the crushing weight of guilt. As days passed, rumors began to spread. Some spoke of a supernatural beast, others of a particularly cruel serial killer. Fear settled over the town like a dense fog, with people avoiding going out after dark. A week after the attacks, during an emergency meeting at the town hall, young teacher Mariana raised a disturbing question. Had anyone noticed that the attacks occurred on the night of the full moon? A tense silence fell over the room. Chief Almeida furrowed his brow, his analytical mind starting to make connections.
Caindo de joelhos, começou a rezar, implorando por perdão, não aos homens que o perseguiam, mas a Deus. Os primeiros caçadores chegaram à clareira, liderados por Almeida e Mariana. Ao avistarem o padre ajoelhado, hesitaram. Diante deles estava um homem quebrado, não o monstro que aterrorizava a cidade. Jerônimo ergueu os olhos, lágrimas escorrendo por seu rosto envelhecido. Acabem com isso, ele implorou. Libertem-me desta maldição.
He remembered ancient legends about werewolves, creatures that transformed into murderous beasts during the full moon. Meanwhile, Father Jerônimo, sitting at the back of the room, felt his heart race. He knew the next full moon was approaching, and with it, the terror of a new transformation. In the following days, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Sheriff Almeida, initially skeptical about supernatural explanations, began researching werewolves. He discovered that, according to folklore, a werewolf could be identified by certain physical features in its human form, such as fused eyebrows and birthmarks. The net was closing in. Almeida started to closely observe the men of the town for revealing signs. His attention soon turned to Father Jerônimo, whose erratic behavior and haggard appearance raised suspicions. One night, as the priest walked alone through the square, Almeida approached him. "Father, I would like to ask you a few questions about the night of the attacks." Jerônimo felt a shiver run down his spine. "Of course, Sheriff, how can I help?" The ensuing conversation was tense, with Almeida asking increasingly specific questions about the priest's whereabouts on the fateful night. Jerônimo stammered and sweated, his vague answers fueling the sheriff's suspicions. By the end of the interrogation, Almeida was convinced something was wrong with the priest. He didn't have proof yet, but his police instincts screamed that he was close to the truth. Meanwhile, Jerônimo returned to the church tormented. He knew he couldn't keep his secret much longer. The full moon was approaching again, and with it, the certainty of more deaths. That night, kneeling before the altar, Father Jerônimo made a desperate choice. He couldn't allow the beast within him to cause more victims. With trembling hands, he took a heavy silver cross and began to forge a chain. If he couldn't rid himself of the curse, he would try to contain the beast. But would that be enough? And if someone found him chained during his transformation? As the moon grew in the sky, the tension in São Cipriano reached fever pitch. Everyone wondered, would the beast return? And if so, who would be its next victim? The full moon hung in the sky like a grim omen over São Cipriano. The streets were deserted, with residents locked in their homes, curtains drawn and doors reinforced. Sheriff Almeida had organized extra patrols, but fear was palpable in the air. In the church, Father Jerônimo trembled as he tightened the silver chains around his body. He had locked himself in the crypt below the altar, praying that the stone walls and chains would be enough to contain the beast. As the night progressed, the transformation began. Bones cracked, muscles expanded, and muffled screams of pain echoed through the crypt. The silver chains burned the creature's skin, but the werewolf's strength was immense. With a deafening roar, it ripped the chains from the wall. At that moment, the crypt door opened, and Mariana, the young teacher, entered with a flashlight in hand. She had followed the priest, intrigued by his suspicious behavior. Her eyes widened in terror as she saw the scene before her. The werewolf, still partially chained, advanced toward her. Mariana screamed and ran out of the church, with the monster in pursuit. Her screams attracted the attention of nearby patrols. Sheriff Almeida was in his vehicle when he heard the call over the radio. He sped towards the church, his heart racing. His suspicions were correct, but the reality was even more horrific than he had imagined. The chase extended through the streets of the town. Mariana ran desperately, while the werewolf gained on her every second. House lights turned on as residents were awakened by the commotion. When Almeida arrived, he saw Mariana cornered in an alley. The werewolf was advancing, snarling and drooling. Without hesitation, the sheriff drew his gun and fired. The bullets hit the creature but only seemed to enrage it further. The monster turned to Almeida, eyes blazing with fury. It was then that Mariana, summoning all her courage, picked up a piece of wood from the ground and drove it into the werewolf's back. The creature's howl of pain echoed through the city. Staggering, the werewolf fled into the nearby forest, leaving a trail of blood. Almeida helped Mariana to her feet, both panting and shocked by what they had witnessed. There were no more doubts. The werewolf legend was true, and the monster was none other than the respected Father Jerônimo. The news spread quickly. Within hours, the entire town knew what had happened. Search teams were organized to track the wounded creature in the forest. The morning brought a mix of fear and determination to the residents of São Cipriano. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Father Jerônimo was regaining his human form, wounded, confused, and tormented by guilt. He knew he could not return. His secret was exposed, and now he was a man or monster on the run. As the sun rose, the inhabitants of São Cipriano prepared for a hunt that would forever change the fate of their small town. The final battle against the werewolf priest was about to begin. The sun set over São Cipriano, casting a reddish hue over the sky. A crowd gathered in the central square, armed with torches, firearms, and silver objects. Fear had turned into collective rage, and the residents demanded justice or revenge. Sheriff Almeida tried to maintain order, but knew it was a lost battle. The crowd's bloodlust was almost as terrifying as the werewolf itself. In the forest, Father Jerônimo, now in his human form, staggered between the trees, wounded and exhausted. He could hear the distant shouts and barking announcing the hunter's approach. His body ached, not just from physical injuries but also from the guilt and regret consuming his soul. As night fell, Jerônimo reached a clearing with the ruins of an old chapel. There, he decided to make his final stand. At that moment, the full moon emerged from the clouds, bathing the clearing in its spectral light. Jerônimo's body began to convulse, the transformation starting against his will. Almeida shouted for everyone to fall back, but it was too late. In seconds, the werewolf was standing, roaring in pain and fury. The crowd panicked. Some fled while others advanced with their weapons. Chaos ensued. Gunshots echoed through the forest. Torches were thrown through the air. The werewolf, in its pain and confusion, attacked indiscriminately, injuring several townspeople. It was Mariana who finally managed to approach, wielding an improvised silver-tipped spear. With tears in her eyes, she faced the beast that had once been the kind priest of her town. "Forgive me, Father," she whispered before driving the spear into the werewolf's chest. A howl of agony split the night. The werewolf staggered backward, the spear still embedded in its chest. Slowly, its bestial form began to dissolve, revealing once again the human and frail body of Father Jerônimo. With his last breath, Jerônimo looked up at the starry sky. A serene smile formed on his lips. "I'm free," he murmured before closing his eyes for the last time. Silence fell over the clearing. The curse had ended, but at a terrible cost. The townspeople of São Cipriano looked at each other, the realization of what they had done weighing on their consciences. In the years that followed, the story of the werewolf priest would become a dark legend, whispered around campfires. The small chapel in the forest was rebuilt, not as a place of worship, but as a memorial, a reminder of the dangers of prejudice, fear, and the high price of redemption. And on full moon nights, it is said that one can still hear a distant howl echoing through the forest, a lament for the tormented soul that finally found peace.